In the wild heart of Yellowstone, where every day is a battle for survival, only the strongest wolves earn the right to lead. Packs rise and fall, rivals fight for territory, and dominant alphas are constantly challenged by younger, stronger competitors. Most leaders eventually lose their position, some disappear without a trace. Others are remembered only by the wolves that followed them. But one wolf was different. For years he ruled one of Yellowstone's most powerful packs. Not through fear, but through something scientists rarely witnessed in a top predator. He was a fierce fighter when he had to be, yet he showed a level of restraint, loyalty, and leadership that left researchers stunned. While other alphas relied on aggression to maintain control, this wolf seemed to command respect in a completely different way. What made him even more remarkable was that he repeatedly defeated rivals that should have beaten him. Larger wolves challenged him, younger wolves tested him. Entire packs threatened his territory, yet somehow he continued to prevail. And the stories that emerged from those encounters would eventually make him one of the most admired wolves ever documented. Researchers spent years observing his behavior, recording his movements, and trying to understand what made him so different. The more they watched, the more unusual he seemed. In a world governed by violence and competition, this alpha wolf displayed qualities that few expected to find in a wild predator. Even today, decades later, scientists, wildlife experts, and wolf enthusiasts still speak about him with a level of respect rarely given to an animal. So who was this legendary alpha wolf? And how did a single wolf become one of the greatest leaders Yellowstone has ever known? This is the extraordinary true story of Wolf 21. For decades, Yellowstone National Park has been one of the most important places in the world for wolf research. Every movement, every hunt, every rivalry, and every leadership change within its wolf packs has been carefully documented by scientists, hoping to better understand one of nature's most intelligent predators. Among the hundreds of wolves that have been observed since wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in the mid-1990s, a few individuals stood out from the rest. Some became famous for their strength, others for their hunting ability or their role in shaping entire packs. But very few earned the kind of reputation that Wolf 21 would eventually achieve. Born into Yellowstone's growing wolf population, Wolf 21 entered a world where survival was never guaranteed. Young wolves faced harsh winters, dangerous prey, territorial disputes, and constant competition from rival packs. Only a small number would live long enough to become leaders. Fewer still would leave a lasting mark on the park's history. Yet from an early age, Wolf 21 appeared different. As researchers followed his development, they noticed traits that were unusual for a future alpha. He was undeniably powerful, but unlike many dominant wolves, he did not seem driven by unnecessary aggression. He was confident without being reckless, strong without being cruel. And over time, those qualities would help him build one of the most successful and respected wolf dynasties Yellowstone had ever seen. What makes Wolf 21's story so remarkable is that it challenges many assumptions about leadership in the animal kingdom. Popular culture often portrays alpha wolves as ruthless rulers who maintain control through fear and violence. But the reality observed by scientists was far more complex. In many situations, Wolf 21 demonstrated that true leadership could come from confidence, protection, and loyalty rather than intimidation alone. As the years passed, his reputation grew not only among the wolves that followed him, but also among the researchers who spent countless hours watching his pack through spotting scopes across Yellowstone's vast valleys. Some scientists would later describe him as one of the greatest wolves they had ever studied. Others saw him as a rare example of leadership rarely witnessed in the wild. But before he became a legend, Wolf 21 first had to survive the challenges that every young wolf faces, a journey that would test his strength, intelligence, and determination in ways no one could have predicted. Wolf 21's rise did not begin with dominance. It began with survival. In the early years of Yellowstone's restored wolf population, life was still unstable. Packs were forming, territories were constantly shifting, and every wolf was fighting for a place in a rapidly evolving ecosystem. Young males like Wolf 21 were not born into power. They had to earn every inch of respect through experience, endurance, and calculated decisions. As he matured, researchers began tracking him more closely. What they recorded was not the behavior of a reckless young predator, but of a wolf that was constantly learning. He watched other wolves carefully before engaging. He tested situations before committing, and when he did act, it was precise, controlled, and effective. Wolf 21 was not the largest wolf in Yellowstone, nor the fastest. But he had something that separated him from many of his rivals: adaptability. In a world where one mistake could mean death, this trait would become his greatest advantage. Eventually, he began to associate with a growing pack that would later become one of Yellowstone's most influential groups. Within this pack, a hierarchy was already forming, and challenges for leadership were inevitable. Stronger males came and went, but Wolf 21 remained consistent, steady in behavior, reliable in hunts, and increasingly respected by others. Over time, subtle shifts began to appear. Other wolves started deferring to him in small but meaningful ways. He was no longer just another member of the pack. He was becoming a central figure in decision-making, especially during hunts and territorial movements. But in Yellowstone, respect is never permanent. Every alpha position exists under constant pressure. Rivals were watching. Neighboring packs were expanding. And somewhere beyond the ridges and valleys, wolves stronger and more aggressive than Wolf 21 were preparing to challenge the balance he was slowly building. At this stage, nothing was guaranteed. His future leadership was not yet secured. It was only beginning to take shape under the constant threat of conflict. And soon, those challenges would stop being distant possibilities and become direct confrontations that would define his legacy. As Wolf 21's influence inside the pack slowly grew, so did the tension around him. Yellowstone is not a place where leadership is given, it is taken, often through brutal and repeated confrontation. And once a wolf starts showing signs of dominance, he becomes a target. It didn't take long before rival males began testing him. At first, these challenges were subtle, brief standoffs during territory patrols, aggressive posturing during feeding, and tense moments where one wrong move could trigger a full fight. But over time, the pressure increased. Stronger, more experienced wolves from competing packs began entering his territory, forcing confrontations that would decide who controlled the land. Wolf 21 was not always the obvious physical favorite in these encounters. In many situations, he faced opponents larger and more aggressive than himself. Wolves that relied on raw power and intimidation tried to break his position early, expecting him to step back like many younger males before him. But something unusual happened. Wolf 21 did not panic. He did not overreact. Instead, he responded with calculated resistance, holding his ground when necessary, but avoiding unnecessary escalation when it would weaken the pack as a whole. This balance between aggression and restraint confused his rivals. It made him unpredictable in a system where most conflicts followed clear patterns of dominance and submission. Inside his own pack, however, pressure was also building. Leadership in a wolf pack is never fully secure, even from within. Younger males grow stronger, alliances shift, and females often play a crucial role in determining stability. Any sign of weakness, any hesitation in hunts or territorial defense, could quickly turn respect into doubt. There were moments when Wolf 21 was pushed to his limits. Encounters that left injuries. Days when food was scarce and every decision carried risk. Nights when the pack's survival depended entirely on coordinated hunts that could easily fail in Yellowstone's harsh condition. And through all of this, one question followed him everywhere. Was he truly strong enough to remain the leader? Or was he simply delaying the inevitable collapse that claims most alpha wolves? The answer would not come easily, because the greatest test of Wolf 21's life was not just surviving rival packs, it was proving, again and again, that his leadership could withstand the constant pressure of a wilderness that never stops challenging its kings. The breaking point came when Yellowstone's fragile balance shifted into open confrontation. By this stage, Wolf 21 was no longer just a rising leader. He was a recognized alpha, and with that status came constant challenges from rival packs that saw his territory as an opportunity. Pressure had been building for months, but now it reached a level where avoidance was no longer possible. A powerful rival pack began pushing deeper into his range, testing boundaries with increasing aggression. These were not random encounters anymore. They were coordinated advances, designed to weaken his control and force a collapse in leadership. For Wolf 21, this meant one thing: direct confrontation. In the wild, wolf battles are not cinematic fights. They are brief, explosive, and decisive. Every movement carries risk. Every hesitation can be fatal. When the confrontation finally happened, it unfolded with the intensity that Yellowstone researchers rarely forget. Wolf 21 stood at the center of the tension, facing opponents that matched him in size and exceeded him in aggression. The air between the packs was heavy with silence, broken only by warning calls and rigid postures. Then, without warning, the conflict erupted. What followed was not just a fight for territory. It was a fight for identity, for survival, for dominance that had been questioned for too long. Wolf 21 did not rely on blind aggression. Instead, he used precision, timing, and coordination with his pack. Every move was calculated to protect not just himself, but the stability of his entire group. Where other wolves might have broken under pressure or rushed into mistakes, he held control in the chaos. The clash was short but defining. Injuries were sustained on both sides. Tension peaked at levels that left researchers watching from a distance, fully aware that they were witnessing a turning point in Yellowstone's wolf history. And then, something changed. The rival pressure began to break, not through sheer destruction, but through withdrawal, an acknowledgement that this pack, under Wolf 21's leadership, would not collapse under intimidation. The opposing wolves eventually pulled back, leaving the territory intact, but the message was permanent. Wolf 21 had survived one of the most critical challenges of his life, but more importantly, he had proven something that even seasoned researchers could not ignore. His leadership was not temporary. It was stable, resilient, and capable of withstanding the harshest tests Yellowstone could produce. And from this moment onward, his name would no longer be associated with potential. It would be associated with legacy. As the seasons passed after that defining confrontation, Wolf 21's story began to settle into something rare in Yellowstone's harsh world stability. Most alpha wolves do not get the privilege of time. Their reigns are usually short, disrupted by injury, aging, or stronger rivals. But Wolf 21 managed to maintain a level of control that allowed his pack to not only survive, but function with remarkable consistency in an environment built on constant unpredictability. Researchers observing him over the years began to notice something even more unusual than his dominance, his influence on the behavior of his pack. Under his leadership, coordination during hunts became more structured. Conflicts within the group reduced. Even during moments of scarcity, the pack showed a level of unity that suggested strong internal trust. Wolf 21 was not remembered simply because he was powerful. He was remembered because his leadership appeared to shape the behavior of others in ways that went beyond instinct. In a system where survival often overrides cooperation, his pack demonstrated a balance that fascinated scientists. Eventually, as with all wild leaders, time began to take its toll. Injuries accumulated. Competition continued to evolve. Younger wolves emerged, carrying strength and ambition of their own. And slowly, the era of Wolf 21 began to transition into memory rather than presence. But unlike many wolves whose stories fade once they disappear from view, Wolf 21's legacy remained firmly embedded in Yellowstone research. His behavior became a reference point in studies about wolf leadership, pack stability, and social structure. Scientists continued to compare new alpha wolves against patterns first observed during his reign. Even long after his active years in the wild, his influence remained alive in scientific discussion, field studies, and wildlife documentaries. Because Wolf 21 was not just another alpha in Yellowstone's long history, he was a case study in leadership under pressure, a symbol of balance between strength and restraint, and a reminder that in the wild power is not only measured by force, but by the ability to endure, adapt, and sustain a legacy beyond conflict. And that is why, even today, scientists still talk about this legendary alpha wolf. And so the story of Wolf 21 becomes more than just a tale of one alpha wolf in Yellowstone. It becomes a window into how nature truly works when humans step back and allow ecosystems to rebuild themselves. From the first days of his survival, to the rise of his leadership, and finally to the legacy he left behind, Wolf 21 represents something rare in the wild, a leader who was not defined only by dominance, but by balance, intelligence, and long-term impact on his environment. Even today, when researchers study wolf behavior in Yellowstone, his name still appears in discussions, field notes, and scientific comparisons. Not because he was the biggest or the most aggressive, but because he demonstrated a form of leadership that challenged earlier assumptions about how alpha wolves actually function in the wild. His story reminds us that the natural world is far more complex than simple ideas of strength and weakness. In reality, survival often depends on cooperation, timing, restraint, and the ability to adapt under pressure. And in that complexity, Wolf 21 became something rare. Not just a leader of a pack, but a reference point in wildlife science itself. So when scientists still talk about this legendary alpha wolf, they are not just remembering one animal, they are studying a legacy that continues to shape how we understand wolves. Because in the end, Wolf 21 didn't just live in Yellowstone. He became part of its history.